Welcome to Humanity, the epicenter of ideas surrounding transformative change that will revolutionize the way our world interacts with technology.
So joining me today is Alan Lubitz, a CIO for 20 years, who's ran businesses and now is a consultant, a mentor, a speaker, and a teacher. For more than 10 years, Alan was Senior Vice President at Mercury Insurance, serving as their CIO, their CDO, and CISO, and he was head of innovation. He is responsible for establishing enterprise technology, vision, and leading the investments in customer-centric solutions, new product technology, AI, and global IT operations, information security, business continuity, and much more. Alan, welcome to the Humanity Podcast.
Hey, Kevin. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful to have you with us, both from the perspective as you being a great friend, as well as your rich career that you've had as both an IT leader and as a business leader over your career. As you and I spoke earlier, one of the things that we started talking about was how do organizations drive and inspire innovation, right? And we started talking about 5 different themes that you came up with that you saw when you look back at your career, 5 common things that kept reoccurring. And so we wanted to go through that and just start to discuss with you, looking at those different themes as to how we can extract for our listeners tidbits of knowledge in terms of inspiring innovation.
Let me first say that, the way I came up with these 5 themes was I thought back to the most interesting and challenging projects I'd ever taken on in my career. And I thought about what were the characteristics that were common themes. And 3 of them were very much business related. And the other 2 were more human personality and team related. And there was also sort of an intangible one about the experience or the usability. And so those are the 5 things. You want me to run through the 5?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Yeah, let's just start with number 1.
Okay, so the first one was, this is the business side here. I said, I always have loved when I get a chance to solve something really complicated. It's this challenge that others have either tried before or everybody says it can't be done. That's what gets my juices flowing. And so, that's where I get excited to try one of those.
Right. I'm one of the things that I keep thinking of when everybody's inherited a project or tried to start a project that started and failed, and you've got to get it back on the tracks and inspire everybody. So one of the key things I'd be interested in understand is when you're in that situation where the project prior hasn't succeeded and you need to get it back on the tracks, what are some things that you would advise others to start to think about or do?
Well, I would say the first thing is, you have to analyze it to figure out why is it that it hasn't succeeded in the past. One example I would think of is a project I did many years ago where I was responsible for all the facilities for an aerospace company across the country. And I recall that what the previous people had done, what other companies were doing, is that they would look at the various projects that they might win. And in the aerospace world, you're doing proposals with, let's say, mostly government contracts. Mm-hmm. So let's say that you might win a satellite project, you might win a classified software project, and you might win, let's say, a microchip project. Each of the 3 of those has radically different facility needs. So building a satellite, you need very high bay, high ceiling cranes and all kinds of heavy equipment, machinery that can rattle and shake and change the thermal dynamics. The software project that's highly secure requires a building that's got shielding around it so that RF signal can't get into it. But and it has mostly computer terminals and desks. And a chip manufacturing plant has got air handling equipment that's highly specialized, takes all the particles out there. People wear special suits. So what had been done, kind of the state of the art previously, was people would look at all the possible projects that you might win. They would multiply that times a risk-win factor and say, okay, we're probably going to need, let's say, 1 million square feet. And then they would set about trying to sign up leases for buildings with 1 million square feet. Then if they won the project, they would have to try to retrofit those facilities to meet the needs. And you can see how, if it was a satellite project, it was so different than if it was a software project. So when we analyzed this and we looked at what would happen working with real estate companies, we found that this led to acquiring many small facilities that were very inefficient, lots of bathrooms, lobbies, and elevators. And what we really needed was larger buildings that were specialized. And the second thing we looked at was making sure that we looked at individually and we gamed out each possible win scenario. It was sort of, if we win this project, what would we do? If we win this project, what would we do? And it was just a different way to look at the problem. So it was a combination of understanding it, looking at the problem differently, and then executing.
Gotcha. How did you focus? I mean, in these situations where you've got a difficult hill to climb or a project that's going to really test the team, what do you do to try to inspire and get everybody aligned to row the boat in one direction, or to get everybody able to go tackle the hill? What are some things that you look to do as you approach teaming?
Well, let's see. I mean, the first thing I think of is that, having a clear mission is really, really key. So you got to make sure that everybody understands what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And so often you'll get a description of the project, but not the problem. And the problem is typically stated in business terms, not in, we have to deliver project X by a certain date. That's not the business problem. The business problem is, what is the thing that is troubling you? Secondly, you've got to get the executive teams on board so that this is actually what they believe is important. Because if they hand you this project and then they go off and start doing other things, they're going to confuse the various people that you're trying to get on board. Those people are going to say, well, wait a minute, the chief executive here really wants something else to be done, so I'm not going to give you the time and attention that you need. So once you have this clear mission and problem to solve, and you now have complete buy-in from that executive team, then you have to start putting together the right people. And the right people vary depending on the nature of the project. But there are certain characteristics I look for, but it does change depending on what the nature of the problem is.
Gotcha. And I think, is there a best practice? I mean, when you talk about stating the mission of the organization, do you continue to take that business objective, speak and ensure that that's the dialogue and language that the IT teams are using as well?
I insist on it. There's a document that I use called a project charter. Some people may call it something different, but it's a very short document, just a few pages. And the bulk of it is about defining the business problem, putting it in very business language. What are the business deliverables? What are the measures of success that a business person will use? And then only after that, the last page or two is more about IT, more about the deliverables, the quality steps that will be taken and things like that. But the majority of that charter document is about getting on the same page from a business perspective. And you'd be amazed. I don't think I've ever had a project charter submitted perfectly yet. I've never had one that completely nailed it. Some have come close, and some of them are so far off, it's crazy. The comparison I would make, it's like when a lawyer is trying a case in a courtroom and they're impaneling the jury. They're trying to get people onto that jury panel that will vote in their favor, that will understand the terms of the case.
Right.
And if you don't do the same thing with a project, if you don't kind of get everybody clear as to what are the objectives and the outcomes and get everybody on the same page, you're going to have a very hard time declaring a victory at the end. Right.
Makes perfect sense. Do you find yourself, sorry to stay on this one theme that we're talking about, but I think it's good to spend time on because it's so critical to alignment, right? When we talk about teaming for success, do you commonly bring in your business stakeholders to help articulate that business outcome vision? Or is this something that you do internally to work with the team to make sure they have a solid basis of understanding of really what the business impact is looking to be made?
Well, at first I try to get the business people to write that portion of the project charter, if at all possible.
Okay.
Sometimes it requires some kind of collaboration and coaching. Sometimes even an IT business analyst or someone of that nature might help them with some of the writing part of it. Because, if we completely leave it up to, say, the business sponsor, you might get a one sentence or one paragraph description in very broad terms. And it's really nailing it down. Like, for instance, I've had a charter where somebody has described a particular deliverable. We want to do a certain thing in a market. Let's just say it's in California.
Mhm.
And all of the materials from that point forward, they describe it in very broad terms. And from that point forward, it all sounds like it's just focused on one county, let's say, in California. And so you have to say, okay, is this project delivering to this first deliverable for this one county, or is it delivering a broader deliverable for a full state, or is it building a foundational deliverable that can now be taken out into multiple geographic areas? And often when we ask a question like that, which seems pretty basic, the business
Right.
people don't know the answer. So they have to then go back and do more homework. Or
Hmm.
we might ask a question like, you're asking us, let's say, to change the look and feel of a particular product or a system that we're delivering. What data do you have to tell us what things the customer currently likes or dislikes about it? And they only have intuition on it. So we have to go back and say, okay, we have two choices. We can go gather more data, or we can treat this project like an experiment. We're going to sandbox it. We'll take a first step and try it in the market and see what reaction we get, and then we'll take a second step. Which way do you want to go? And sometimes that ends up being a better conversation to have as early as possible. And then when you actually deliver something later, it actually meets precisely what you said you were going to deliver. If you go in with misconceptions, and unfortunately it happens a lot, if you go in
Right.
with misconceptions, it's very hard to have a successful outcome.
Right. Right. Well, I like that bidirectional feedback loop and alignment. Right. That's
Yes.
good, important. Um, why don't we go through your theme too, Alan?
Well, the second one I was going to say is just if you look at the things that I've loved doing, it's not only that it's a big challenge, but it's where, I mean, there are complex things that have very little business benefit. Some, let's say, system that currently works but works badly. It's interesting, but I love the ones where the outcome, where the result of doing that important project has a huge impact on the business. It's going to increase revenue by X%, or it's going to improve profitability by X%, or it's going to move us into a new line of business that's strategically important. So for me, that second characteristic is I love having a project that's really very much valued by the business. Those are exciting. Those are fun for me.
Right. Right. Is there a example project that you can think of that you would be a good fit for this criteria? You might want to talk through.
Well, let me describe the third characteristic and I'll tie the two together. I'll give you an example that covers both of
Okay.
them.
Okay.
The third criteria that I love, one of the things I love is when you have an opportunity to delight an end user. I remember as a kid seeing a magician perform, and I would look at the faces of the people as the magic trick was unfolding, and there was this look of kind of amazement and wonder on their face. And I've been very fortunate to be involved in software projects where I've actually seen the same look on people's faces. They've been burdened with a system that doesn't work and doesn't really adapt to what they need, and it's not intuitive. And when you now get it right, it's like the Olympic athlete, when they do the triple axel or whatever it is, it looks so easy.
Mhm.
When you get it right, it looks easy, and people look and they go, "Oh, of course, that's how it should be."
Right.
Yet, why is it that for years and years before, there have been many attempts that have not been right? So it actually takes all three of my themes together. So let me give you an example that hits both of those. I was just most recently in the insurance world, and in insurance, you would think that in the agency environment, the B2B agency channel, you would think that there would be very mature systems for being able to do a quote or write a policy or handle a claim. And surprisingly, there really weren't, there aren't that many out there that anybody would brag about being terrific. And when you ask the agents themselves, they can't really point to any one solution that they think really nailed it.
Hmm.
They might say, for example, that a particular one had been well adopted and people had gotten used to it, but they would never say that they were really intuitive or worked smoothly. And it turns out that ease of being able to place a piece of business, the ease of being able to make a change to a policy, the ease of being able to let a customer know what the impact of a potential change, like if they're going to buy a new car, sell a car, or buy a home or rent being able to do these what if scenarios. It turns out that this is what they do on the phone all day long, and they need something that's really simple and easy to use. So kind of to my 3 points here, it was important to the business because we did an analysis to prove that this was actually hurting our percentage of new business. And if we solved it, we could get more business. End users would place, there was definite evidence that end users would place more business with us if we had a better solution. And we had the opportunity to do the delighting, and we knew that it was complex because people had tried it before. Big companies with lots of budget had tried it and had not succeeded. So we tackled it. We built a great team. We had executive buy-in, and it actually, when I get to my other 2 themes, you'll see it actually had some similarities there too, because we had a lot of autonomy. We were able to hand-pick the right people for it, and it was exciting. It was fun. It was a small team. We had complete control over it, and we were able to use a technique where we're able to interact with the end users, to simulate the end result, and it ended up being a big success.
Since user experience and the end goal of delighting the user is such a key of innovative products as we look at like consumer experience initiatives in IT right now, what are some approaches that you would suggest in order to make sure that we're actually aligning to that delight moment, right? How do you get your team to think about getting to that endpoint, especially to your example, when they don't know what they don't know because they've never seen a system to compare against?
Well, the first thought that comes to my mind is there's a technique called value engineering where you tear apart a complex piece of machinery and you question what's the reason for each of those parts. And I remember being involved in one where they did it with a lawnmower, and there were hundreds of parts. And the question becomes, do you actually need to have all 100 plus of those parts, or are there simpler ways to do it? So you're constantly questioning, why do you do things? And in the software world, certainly in a workflow type project, it's the same thing. You have to now go, you can't take anything on face value. You've got to strip it down to its most basic element. And you say, okay, what is the business function that's being performed here? Like in lending, someone has money and someone wants to borrow money. And if the two of them get together and just shake hands and say they'll do it, everything else becomes friction in between. And there's a lot of steps involved in borrowing money, right?
Right.
Similarly, in insurance, the person has a car or has a house or has a boat or has a commercial business, and they want to be covered for risk. And that's the most simple component of it. And there's a company that can take that risk and insure them. So what's all this noise happening in the middle? So you break it down into all these pieces, and then you do something that I call the happy path. You try to find what is the simplest, most direct route to get from what the consumer wants to what you can provide for them. And then you realize everything else around that is noise, and you try to strip away as much of it as you can. Once you refine it and you get this happy path well established, then you start to build around it. And I like to use, especially in a consumer product, I like to use kind of a trial and error, trial and feedback method. It's, I go back to my scientific roots, as I have my undergraduate degrees are in sciences. And it's really a scientific experimental approach. You come up with a theory, you build it as economically as you possibly can, and then you test it. So in software, there are really cool tools that we have that we can simulate an actual transaction, even if it's not actually hitting a real computer in the background. It's, it may be all happening in the front, but you can make it so that the end user can look like they're actually testing the theory that you've come up with, because you've now got a theory that says, okay, how can I best affect this happy path, make it happen? So you put it out there, and the trick that you look for is, does that person have to look away and look to you in your face? Do you see them searching around? Because if you see that they've now hit a little stumbling block and it isn't absolutely intuitive, you made a mistake. So you have to go back and you have to look for these human signals. And this happens very dynamically. You can go back to, even during a break in your meeting, you can retool the software tool to now come back and make it more intuitive, like putting a little arrow or flashing the next button or changing, continue to next or whatever word makes it easier for people. And so this is what a lot of times happens in A/B testing on websites or on mobile apps. And you just have to translate that to the entire project. And that becomes the way you test and validate. And then you come up with, and you do come up with many difficult problems in the middle. How are you going to solve this? But those are the right problems to solve. And then once you've got it where you've got the end user is now nodding and saying, okay, I know what to do next. I can get through this, and they get through it quickly. And by the way, we time everything. We measure number of clicks, everything. So we know end-to-end time. We know how many times they had to click or look around or ask for help. And when you refine that, you get it, then you nailed it.
Oh, it's really interesting. Interesting. The approach that you're laying out there is very, I think the hard part is when you're delighting a user, it tends to stray outside of the scientific approach. But I think putting the wrapper of how you apply science and measurable quantitatively to clicks and time, and even the qualitative look up at you if they're lost, I think that's fascinating. That's funny.
I'll give you one more thought. Data is so important in so many of the things that we do. It's interesting that some groups, even some users, will tell you that a particular thing is important, a particular type of transaction. Well, fortunately, you can go back and look at data and you can see how many times do people actually do what they say that is so important. And if it's less than like 5% of the time, it's a different, in my opinion, different part of your solution than if it's 95% of the time. If everybody's doing it, you have to handle it differently than the rare case, because the rare cases probably need a little bit extra hand-holding. Not only people aren't going to judge you as much on that, but also they don't remember from one time to the next how they did it. So, but if you burden them on the 95% with extra steps, they get tired of it. After the first 2 or 3 times, and they know how to do it. Now all that extra help is no longer appreciated. But in the rare cases, it's very appreciated that you give them a few extra clicks. So it's not like getting to 0 clicks or 1 click is always the answer. It has to do more with how frequently do they use the function.